If you think fat loss is just about eating less and moving more, well, you're missing out on the single most powerful tool you have. Today, we're going to dive deep into the science of how you can use your very own nervous system to literally flip the switch on fat burning. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the absolute foundation. Then we'll uncover the master controller of your metabolism, which, surprise, is your nervous system. From there, we'll get into some really cool specific tools like unconventional movement, cold exposure, and how to optimize your exercise, before we finish up with some key compounds that can support the whole system.
Okay, first things first. Before we get into all the advanced, cutting-edge tools, we have to build the foundation. Seriously, without this solid base, none of the other strategies are going to be nearly as effective. You have to get this part right.
We all know the basic formula, right? Calories in versus calories out. And look, that's a fundamental truth of metabolism, but it is not the whole story. Not even close. Check out this fascinating study on hotel service staff. Researchers took two groups. They told one group that their daily work, cleaning rooms, pushing carts, was actually great exercise. The other group, they told them nothing. And the result? It's pretty mind-blowing. The group that simply believed their work was exercise saw significant fat loss and had better health markers, and they didn't change their activity at all. It's an incredible demonstration of how your mindset, through your nervous system, can directly shape your body. So before we start trying to turn up the metabolic heat, we have to make sure the engine is running smoothly. Think of these as the absolute non-negotiables. First up, quality sleep. It is crucial for hormone balance. Next, you've got to get enough essential fatty acids. We're talking over 1,000 milligrams of EPA daily, which helps both your metabolism and your mood. A healthy gut microbiome is another huge one, which you can support with things like fermented foods. And finally, your thyroid. Think of it as your body's thermostat. It needs the right stuff to work, like iodine and selenium, which, by the way, you can get from just a couple of Brazil nuts a day. Get these pillars solid, and you are ready for some real progress.
All right, now we get to the central idea of this whole explainer, the part of the fat loss equation that is so often overlooked. It's not just about your muscles and your fat cells, it is all about the nervous system that controls them.
This quote from neurobiologist Andrew Huberman just perfectly frames this whole discussion. We tend to think of our nervous system for things like movement and thought, but it's also the master regulator of our metabolism. Your neurons are the literal on-off switch for burning fat. Okay, so to understand how this works, we need to define a key term: lipolysis. It sounds technical, but it's pretty simple. It's the process of getting stored fat out of your fat cells. Think of your fat cells like tiny storage tanks of fuel. Lipolysis is what opens the tap. And what controls that tap? You guessed it, chemical signals sent directly from the neurons that are connected to those fat cells. Now this brings us to a really critical concept. Fat loss is a two-step process. It's not just one thing. Step one is mobilization. That's lipolysis, where your neurons release adrenaline to get fat out of those storage cells. But that is only half the battle. If that fat isn't used for something, it just gets stored right back again. So step two is oxidation, the actual burning of that fat for energy inside your cells. Your nervous system is the key to kicking off both of these steps. And this slide right here, this shows a distinction that changes everything. The old way of thinking was that it was just general adrenaline, floating around in our bloodstream that triggered fat burning. But we now know it is a much more precise, a much more local process. It's the adrenaline released from nerve endings directly at the fat cell that gives the command. This is huge because it means we can use specific behaviors to target this local signal. So, knowing that our nervous system is sending out these local, targeted signals, the big question is, how can we activate them? Well, our first tool is something you might actually already be doing, and I promise you it's way more powerful than you realize. We are talking about NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but it just means all the calories you burn from movements that aren't formal exercise. Bouncing your knee right now, tapping your pen, standing up and pacing during a phone call, even just sitting up straight and maintaining your posture, that is all NEAT.
Okay, look at this. A massive range of numbers on the screen, 800 to 2,500. What on earth could this possibly represent when we're talking about burning fat? It's not minutes of exercise, it's not grams of protein. Any ideas?
And there's the answer. This is the power of NEAT. It's the additional number of calories the people who fidget and pace burn every single day compared to people who are more sedentary. Up to 2,500 calories. For a lot of people, that's more than you'd burn in a tough hour-long session at the gym. These small, low-level movements are an incredibly potent way to send those burn fat signals from your nervous system all day long.
Okay,
Our next tool involves turning down the thermostat on your environment to turn up the heat inside your body. We're going to talk about using cold to activate some very special, very powerful fat-burning machinery.
So let's meet brown fat, or brown adipose tissue. Now, unlike the regular white fat that just stores energy, brown fat is jam-packed with mitochondria, which actually gives it its brownish color. Its main job isn't to store energy, but to burn it like crazy to produce heat. Think of it as your body's own internal furnace. We're all born with a lot of it, but we tend to lose it as we get older, unless we do things to actively stimulate.
So how do we light that furnace? Through shivering. That's the key. When we get cold enough to shiver, our muscles start to contract, and they release a molecule called succinate. Succinate then travels through our bloodstream straight to our brown fat, and it acts as the direct signal to crank up the heat, burning a ton of calories in the process. So shivering is the trigger that releases the messenger that activates the furnace. Simple as that?
And here is the key takeaway for how to actually use this. Most people, when they get in a cold shower or an ice bath, they try to grit their teeth and resist the shiver. But for fat loss, that is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. The shiver is the goal. It's the trigger for that succinate release and the brown fat activation. So you want to embrace it. A really simple way to do this is to get in a cold shower until you start shivering, then maybe get out for a second, and then get back in to trigger it again. The goal is to shiver, not to become so adapted to the cold that you stop shivering altogether. We've covered NEAT and we've covered cold. Now let's talk about more traditional exercise, because the type of training you do, and just as importantly, when you do it, can dramatically change which fuel source your body decides to burn.
Now this slide reveals this really fascinating inversion of fuel sources. It's kind of cool. During a high-intensity workout like sprints, your body needs fast energy, so it burns stored carbs or glycogen. But the real magic happens afterward. During recovery, your metabolism stays cranked up and it burns primarily fat. Now, moderate-intensity cardio is the complete opposite. It burns a higher percentage of fat during the activity, but your body switches back to burning carbs afterward. This means that high-intensity interval training can basically turn you into a fat-burning machine for hours after you've already left the gym. And this right here highlights a very specific strategy for that steady-state cardio. If you exercise in a fasted state, say first thing in the morning before you eat, your body has to rely on its stored fuel. And the research shows there's this really interesting crossover point. After about 90 minutes of continuous moderate exercise, your body starts burning significantly more fat for fuel. So for those long weekend hikes or bike rides, doing that before breakfast can be an incredibly powerful way to tap directly into your fat stores.
Okay, for our final section, let's look at some specific compounds and dietary strategies. Now, these are not magic pills, let's be clear, but they can be used to support the neurological and metabolic pathways we've been talking about, basically making all the other tools we've discussed work even better.
So let's look at a few science-backed compounds that can help this whole process. Caffeine is a familiar one, right? It directly helps increase that local epinephrine release we talked about, boosting fat mobilization. Then you've got something like yerba mate, which works a bit differently by increasing a hormone called GLP-1 to help with fat burning. This slide also mentions acetyl L-carnitine. You can think of that one like a shuttle bus. It helps transport the fatty acids we've mobilized into the mitochondria to actually get burned for energy. And finally, compounds like berberine help keep insulin low. And this is so important because high insulin slams the brakes on fat burning, so managing it creates a much better environment for fat loss. So we've covered a ton of ground, from the power of your own belief to the science of shivering. The one single thread connecting all of it is your nervous system. It really is the master controller. The key takeaway here is that you have direct levers you can pull to change the signals your brain sends to your fat cells. You don't have to do everything at once. Maybe it's just pacing on your next phone call, or a 30-second cold rinse after your shower, or having your coffee before a walk. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. What's one small change you can make today to send a new, more powerful signal for fat loss to your body? Thanks for tuning in.